But y'all might welcome Miss Rachel.
Thank you, Todd. I appreciate it. Thank you all. So Ronnie said you all were a fun group, and I can tell. Lots of laughing, and congratulations to you, Todd. So I'm going to share a little bit about the Alabama Policy Institute, what we do and what we're working on. But before I do that, I just want to share what the Rotary means to me personally. Something like 20 years ago, I was part of a scholarship competition, and part of that was to travel around the state and give little speeches. And my very first speech was at a Rotary Club. And of course, I was nervous, and I was a high schooler, and I have absolutely no idea what in the world I talked about. But I'll never forget the spirit of kindness that the Rotary Club showed to me, listening and giving me their attention, asking questions. And then the second thing that Rotary has meant a difference to me in is as a mother. We have, my husband and I have 5 children, ranging in the ages of the youngest, who's 4, up to a 13-year-old. And your 4-way test is such a helpful, ethical guide for me when I want to help them think through their words, their actions. Last week, my 3rd grader, she got in the car and she was just so very eager to tell on someone that had done something in her class, and she got in the car just so eager to tell the whole family. And I asked her, hold on, that may be the truth, but is it beneficial to all concerned? Is it going to build goodwill and better friendships? Do we really need to hear basically what it is that you're about to tell us? And she really did rethink that. So thank you all so much for keeping that tradition and for all of your traditions of service and action. We certainly find it to be such a good example. So the Alabama Policy Institute, for those of you who may not be familiar with us, is a nonpartisan, nonprofit research and education group. You might could call us a think tank. And we have the sole purpose of dedicating all of our energies, all of our research to making Alabama better. And we've been doing this for 30 years. I really like how our president and CEO, Caleb Crosby, described what we do and why we do it. He said, there are so many things we like about our state and make us proud to be Alabamians, but there are other things that we see that make us realize that we could do better. And a lot of that comes from our state government. That's where API comes in. We're only focused on that goal. You've got a team of people who wake up every single day searching for areas they can plug into to make a huge impact in the state. At API, we strive to look at every scenario through the lens of principle. It's our principles that have led us to stand in the gap. And I really feel like that is where Rotary and API have a lot in common. I think about some of your principles that you might view what you choose to do through service above self, advancing peace and goodwill around the world. So, at API, our foundational principles are a belief in free markets, limited government, and strong families. So we have a real commitment to the ideals of conservatism, and when we approach problems, we try to view all of that through those lenses. And we get to work with wonderful folks like Representative over here and brainstorm with them and work with them to try to find solutions. And to be honest, some ideas coming out of either side of the political spectrum there in the legislature aren't so good. And we will put our research and our capabilities to work, shed light on any unintended consequences that a lawmaker might not be thinking of, and firmly speak that truth in love, but with a fair and strong-minded spirit. And then when there are good ideas, we partner, we collaborate, we bring together a coalition to make sure that those come to fruition as well. I recently went to the Rotary International website, and I was struck by the first words I saw. It said, people of action. Rotary is where neighbors, friends, and problem solvers share ideas, join leaders, and take action to create lasting change. And I really feel like if you just changed a few words, that's what we're trying to do at API. We're people of action looking to create lasting change in Alabama. So speaking of action, I would love to just share with you some of our focus priorities for 2019. These are areas that we feel need changing right now and that have the possibility of being changed right now. Because they get to the root of what we see as a major problem in Alabama. So we did some research and found something pretty disturbing. If you are born poor in Alabama, you are highly unlikely to break out of that cycle of poverty. less likely, and this is what's disturbing to me, less likely than any other state except for South Carolina. We are tied with South Carolina. Y'all, we believe that that just shouldn't be. And we are committed to helping change that, because really the potential is there in Alabama. We compared our state to other states in several key areas, and we found that, we rank on average pretty good in those areas that indicate our potential. Let me give you just a few example statistics. Alabama has the 28th largest GDP in the nation, according to the Bureau of Economic Analysis. We rank 16th in the nation for energy production, according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration. The Port of Mobile is the 10th largest port in the country, according to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. We rank 17th in affordability and have the 9th lowest cost of living. And yet when we looked at other indicators to show how we're doing compared to other states, we really shoot to the end of the pack. Some examples of that: we're the 7th poorest state and the 47th worst in education, according to the Pew Research Center. I'm sorry, according to the U.S. News and World Report. Business Insider ranked us an abysmal 48th in economic opportunity and 40th in entrepreneurship. So, we looked at that, we naturally asked the question, why the disparity between our assets, our potential, and some of our outcomes in these key areas? And we looked at the states with similar potential to ours, whose outcomes seem to match their potential a little bit more, broke it down by income level. And what we found is if you took out the low income numbers, our potential and our outcome more so matched. Whereas it didn't make as big of a difference in some of the other states if you took out those numbers. So we asked the question, why are the poor in Alabama doing worse than in other states? And why is it that if you are born here, you are so likely to stay poor? We drilled into that and found a few key areas that we believe contribute to that vicious cycle of poverty, where our state government perhaps is creating barriers to entry and putting hurdles in place that make it hard to break out of that poverty, that also keep people dependent on the state. So just some of those areas of reform that we're looking into and that we're hoping to tackle this year: education, criminal justice, occupational licensing, and to a lesser degree, civil asset forfeiture. So we're focusing on these issues, not just to make Alabama better, but because when we looked at the well-being on the individual level, what makes folks happier and healthier and have a better life, we realized that some good things become statistically true when someone goes from dependence on the federal government to independence. They're more likely to be married. They're more likely to stay married. Their families are less likely to have abortions, and the list goes on. So API has been meeting with various stakeholders and leaders to discuss solutions, some of which are going to come up in the state legislature next year, but we are very certain that we're getting to an important root of some big problems by seeing again that the root of a problem is tied back to poverty in our state. So let's just dig into these a little bit more, and I'll start with number one, education reform. Y'all, here's the problem. As of February of this year, more than 300 Alabama schools received a D or an F rating from the Alabama State Board of Education. And as mentioned, we rank 47th in education as measured by metrics such as national testing of 8th graders in math, in reading, college readiness, and high school graduation rates, among other metrics. So, this is a tragic disservice to these kids. This is a huge priority for us. We're very grateful for reforms that have already come about, the Alabama Accountability Act, and the authorization of charter schools, but we still know that many students are still in failing schools. So, what does that mean for those kids' future and the future of Alabama? We think the legislature should increase school choice options for these kids by increasing the ceiling for tax credit scholarships or through education savings accounts for students currently attending these schools. And those are some ideas, and we have some others. Number two, we need to have some criminal justice reforms in areas that keep people in that cycle of poverty. So Alabama law currently penalizes ex-offenders in ways that extend far past their prison term, their prison sentence, once they've completed that. Alabama residents may have completed that sentence and are often hindered from going on to employment through hundreds of disqualifying provisions in state laws. There's problems such as how long it takes for some offenders to get their driver's license back. So right when they need to be able to get back to work, some of them can't drive a car to get to work. Even in a big city like Birmingham, the Brookings Institute found that there are only 23% of jobs in Birmingham that low-income folks can reasonably get to using public transit. And that's Birmingham. So if you think about some of the smaller cities, some of the other towns, that number goes down. So we believe that criminals should absolutely pay their due for breaking the law, but we also believe that by making it so difficult to re-enter society and earn a living, we are inadvertently contributing to keeping the poor in poverty and to the crimes that these penalties aim to prevent. More than 30% of incarcerated Alabamians will return to corrections within 3 years of their release. So we feel like we have to find a way to help those folks re-enter society. Related to this, number 3, is occupational licensing reform. So what is that? Well, it's a government regulation that requires someone to have a state license before being allowed to work. And really, there are some jobs that we all really want those folks to have a license for. I'm thinking of architects, doctors, dynamite blasters. So this is not to say that some jobs do not absolutely need a license. However, occupational licensing has exploded in Alabama and really across the nation. I think there are more than 151 occupations that currently require a license. So we're talking about florists, hair braiders, shampoo assistants, barbers. One gentleman that we talked to from Tony, Alabama, his name is Bruce Locke, he shared his hardship as an auctioneer. So, you know, the guys who are saying, going once, going twice, that's an occupation that requires a license. And he said that it was quite hard for him to pay those costly initial fees and recurring fees that go along with doing that. So he gave up his license and sold his business. And he said, quote, "It seemed like the board simply wanted my money. I gave up my license and eventually sold my business. If Alabama were to eliminate the board, I would definitely go back to work as an auctioneer." So we recommend that the state should cut as much of the red tape as possible, really while weighing two priorities, right? We need to be able to balance public safety, which are those occupations that need a license, against the other very important priority that we feel, which is just freeing folks up to get to work without having to pay those exam fees, taking classes, some of the other things that come along with getting that license. And then lastly, we believe the state must reform their civil asset forfeiture laws. So, civil asset forfeiture. Many of you might already be familiar with that. It was in the news quite a bit this past year. But as it stands, law enforcement in Alabama can legally seize property, be that cash or cars or computers or even your home or really you name it, solely on the suspicion of a crime, not on the conviction of a crime. So let's just say someone is traveling and maybe they get pulled over and have some cash on hand. That money is able to be seized only on the suspicion of perhaps it being involved in drugs or whatnot. And you know, they really don't have to answer for where that money went. So I remember reading in the Harvard Law Review recently about some national examples of forfeiture abuse. And they were saying that there was a church secretary who was pulled over for speeding on his way to buy land for the church with donated money. And the state trooper seized roughly $30,000. And I don't know that he ever got that back. So how bad is this in Alabama? there's a institute in Washington, D.C. called the Institute for Justice that gave Alabama a D- and ranked us 31st worst in our civil asset forfeiture laws because we have such a low bar for forfeiture and because there's no conviction required. So I should mention that there has been some reform, some progress, but we don't believe that it's enough. Let me share with you a story that kind of sums up why we do what we do about a local Rotary Club president in Dothan, Alabama. His name is Jamie Vibert. In 2015, more than $25,000 just disappeared from his account. And he found out why several days later when an investigator showed up at his office and said that he was being indicted on title fraud and money laundering because he had sold 2 vehicles to somebody who ended up going on to be involved, those vehicles involved in some kind of a drug sale, some kind of a drug thing. The money from that was used to purchase the cars was drug money. Well, Jamie didn't know anything about that, but he still had to go to court. And he was ultimately found innocent, but his troubles weren't over because he had to hire a lawyer and go back to court to fight to get that money back. So it was a long, drawn-out process. A judge finally did order the return of that money, but he lost about 1/3 of it to legal fees. So by the end of all that, he had lost his dealership. He felt like he lost his reputation. He dropped out of the Rotary Club, other community activities. He stopped going to church. He fell behind on his house payments, and the bank foreclosed on his property. According to the Dothan Eagle, Jamie says he estimates the entire ordeal cost him about $300,000 in attorney's fees, bail, and lost business. So something he said struck me deeply. He said, quote, "It's still a nightmare. It hasn't ended. I worked so hard to build what I had. And the thing is, how can they do that and get away with it? When they finally found out the truth, they didn't stop. It was just like they didn't care." So I shudder to think what that happened, what the reverberations in his family that will mean for his finances, what that did to his retirement account, what it did to his family situation. And you know, civil asset forfeiture was meant to be used for a good reason. It was meant to cut into money for drug cartels. So it began with a good purpose, but research shows that most of the forfeitures are less than $1,500. So if you think about that, that's a lot of money to a lot of folks, but it's not necessarily enough money to go to court over. So oftentimes folks just don't get that money back. So we highly recommend that we at least require a conviction before property is seized. Otherwise, you know, our American system really is flipped, where the innocent have to prove they are not guilty in order to get their property back. So folks, those are our top priorities for 2019, along with several others that we did not get to today. But you know, it's an honor for us to focus all of our passion, all of our energy to researching injustices, researching areas that we believe can help end that cycle of poverty in Alabama and help make us the best that we possibly can be. I would love to ask Meredith, maybe if she would pass around some contact cards, because we often do research, we send out articles that we write. We would love to keep anyone informed who would like to be informed. Just make sure and put your email address on there if you're interested in keeping in touch with us. We would love that. And I wanted to leave plenty of room to really turn the floor over to you guys. I know this is traditionally a Q&A time, but I always find that, you know, speaking to groups like this, you all have great ideas that you want to discuss. So I'd love to ask you, what issues do you care about? What do you hope for Alabama? And really, if you have a question, I'll definitely try to answer it, but I really would love to hear from you. So let me ask you all, do you have any thoughts?
Are you bipartisan?
Yes, yes, sir.
So how do you wield influence? Through lobbying efforts or through just public media?
Sure. So we try very much to be relational. So during the legislative session in Montgomery, we'll go down, we'll have relationships with state senators and representatives, try to answer questions for them, whereas they don't necessarily have a staff of folks who can go and deep dive on a topic like civil asset forfeiture. We try to be that, that nonpartisan research arm for them, to serve them, where they can trust that we're not being paid by special interests.
Right.
You know, we really are searching for the truth.
You have a policy or stance on the lottery?
Well, I don't know if it's a policy stance, but we have a strong recommendation, sir. We don't believe the lottery should be in Alabama. We do not. And I know that's a highly, can I call it contentious issue? I know there's some great points on either side. I've listened to a lot of the arguments for a lottery, and I think there's some good points made. I really do. But I think in our state, when we think again about what are we driven by, helping folks break out of a cycle of poverty, and when we know how regressive a lottery can be, targeting poor areas of town, really targeting poor folks, I don't see how we can morally support it. But I do respect folks who disagree, certainly. That's my thought. What's y'all's thought?
I agree. I agree with what you said.
Yeah. You want to pull that out a little bit more? Or?
Well, okay. So people who do come from impoverished families, they're looking for an American dream, and they'll waste all their money on the lottery, staying poor, praying and hoping that they'll win, and never win. Staying poor, just repeat the cycle. So.
I really agree. And if you look at the advertising that they, not just in Alabama, not things that necessarily we may have seen here, but in other states, billboards being placed in poor areas of town, even the names of lotteries playing into that desire to make it big, make it rich, quick. Studies have shown that that is targeted more toward poor folks.
I got about the poverty thing, having someone close to me that grew up in poverty, came out of poverty, and still has a lot of family in poverty. It's a cycle that you've got to break, because that's their career path, is to follow the same career path as their parents are doing, living off the government. And that's the way they're trained to live, and that's the way their thinking is to live. Is they're gonna live off the government, and they know how to work the government, they know how to get to everything, they know how to do things to get on disabilities, to get all the advantages that they get. It's a cycle. That's the way they're raised and the way they're taught, and that's the way they decide to live their life. So you got to break that cycle, because a lot of her family still lives that way.
You know, and my hope would be that for folks who want to break out of the cycle of poverty, that we do everything we can to make that possible. And you know, there's going to be human error. There might be folks who don't want to break out of it, but for those who do, what are we doing in education? What are we doing in occupational licensing to help them lift themselves out of it? But I hear what you're saying, that it's not a perfect system. And in fact, one of the ideals of conservatism is, you know, imperfectibility, that there really isn't going to be one system that is going to be fail-proof, but we have to at least try to find which one works the best.
Well,
I hear what you're saying.
I was visiting with her family. She had a 20-year-old nephew. All his family lives on the government. He said he's going to apply for disability because his feet are numb. He said he can't feel his feet when he walks. And I said, let's have him step on a nail and see if he jumps.
Sounds like a hard guy to have in your family. Any other thoughts? Yes.
How is your group funded?
We are completely funded by donations. So, you know, and Carl over here, he's the finance guy, so he could probably answer that a little bit better. Carl, would you like to take that?
We are funded completely by donations. We're a 501c3, which, back to your first question, means that we get tax-exempt status, in our case, through by using education. So we can lobby, but only like 15 to 20% of our budget can be on direct lobbying, and so most of our efforts are focused on education, which would be on either a grassroots level, which is really what Rachel and her husband are focused on within our team, or actually at the legislative point of that spear in Montgomery during the session. So we're just trying to educate so people understand that even though at the surface something might look like one way, that there's second and third order effects usually, and what they could be and what those are, and how does that conflict or align with the way you view the world. And as Rachel said, you know, we view the world through a lens that says that we don't want government to be doing any more than they have to do, and we want markets to drive decisions, and we want all that nestled up in a nice traditional family as best as, you know, and it's not a perfect world, but that's the way we're trying to push things forward.
Sure.
I'll just say, I've known about the Alabama Policy Institute for a long time. I don't even remember how long, to tell you the truth. But I read your stuff that they send us emails, and I read all of those policy positions. And I have to say, I agree with probably 90% of what you put out. Sometimes I don't, but most of the time I do. And they are, you know, basically a conservative organization. I don't know if you want me to say this or not, but Congressman Gary Palmer was very, I don't know if he was one of the original founders.
Yeah.
I think he was, but anyway, he has been a big part of the Alabama Policy Institute. So it's a think tank that puts out a lot of stuff, and like I say, I agree with probably 90% of their positions on issues.
Well, we really appreciate that, and we're very proud that Gary Palmer did help found our organization, and he did such a great job, and he's really the foundation of the service in the state for the past 30 years, and we certainly appreciate the 90% that you agree with us, but you know, the 10% that you don't, that makes us better. We're really in search of the truth. We're not married to one ideal. Well, we are conservative, but we're not married to that to the exclusion of the truth. So when folks don't agree with us, we take that seriously, and we want to go find out why, because maybe you're seeing things that we aren't.
And besides that, Gary Palmer played football at Alabama.
War Eagle. Whoopsies.
Why you call yourself API?
The Policy Institute does things like the article I mentioned the other day that appeared in the Sun Mountain Reporter, Parker Snyder had about anger in politics.
Yes.
That's a very good read, and that's the kind of things that come out of the Alabama Policy Institute. But if you've not had an opportunity to read that, go back and look at a past edition, or go on the website. You can find it on the website.
That's right. It's alabamapolicy.org, and Parker's just a super smart guy who does a lot of writing for us. Sir, you were going to say?
Do you have a checklist on your licensing from top to bottom? Who you want to do away with?
Oh, that's a good question. I love that question. I'm not sure if we have
Yes,
that.
we
Do we? Okay,
we
great.
have some print material that's out.
Wonderful.
That is on our website.
Yeah.
That goes into more detail.
I actually completely agree with that. I have a teaching degree, and any county I go to, they make me pay for a new license in that county to be completely refingerprinted, just so I can be a substitute.
Well, may I ask you, is it really just you have to go down, pay a little bit of money, and that's about it?
My name,
That-
and it's $85 every county.
Yes. And there's a lot of things like that where they're not necessarily testing skills. They're not necessarily testing things that would matter to our public safety. It's a revenue stream.
But, I mean, even if it was just one for the whole state, rather than one for every county.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Any other thoughts?
Let me say this about if you're interested in what's going on in Montgomery, I didn't follow it every day, but during the legislative session, I believe Miss Dawson wrote every day. It's like she was at the legislature, worked every day in the legislature, at the end of the day, she brought you up to date what happened in the legislature, what certain bills, what happened on certain bills, where they were at. You know, you could track what was going on in the legislature just by going to the website, and you knew what was going on in the Alabama legislature. And day to day,
Sometimes
it's
it's
about
what didn't happen.
what didn't happen, what did happen, but you got a picture of what was going on in Montgomery during
Sometimes
the
what didn't
legislature
happen is
session.
a whole lot better than what happened.
And traditionally, we have served the legislature, but we're hoping this year to expand a little bit more, as Carl mentioned, into the grassroots, to get out more and talk to people, and not just focus on the representatives and the senators who we love dearly, but also get out there and do things like this and write more articles and connect in that way. So we definitely want to hear from you all as well. So any other thoughts? Yes, sir.
One, do you endorse any particular candidates running for public office? And two, did you ever find out what your little girl wanted to tell you?
You know what's bad? Part of me really wanted to know. Part of me was so curious, and I thought, oh, that's a bad example. We do not endorse particular candidates, being nonpartisan and a nonprofit. But I just encourage everybody to really think of the end game. What do you want to see in Alabama? And then just dial that back. Who do you believe will help us get to that goal? And that would just be my recommendation.
Yes, that called Will Ainsworth his nephew.
Oh, well then.
I was going to ask you what you thought of Will.
Just come in with a big sign, maybe, you know. And did you all know that? I guess you probably did. But
Another good thing on the policy is the amendments. If you're ever curious about what one of the amendments are, they've always got the explanation. There's always 15 amendments on there, and I don't know what none of them are, unless one of them is very local. But they've always got a good explanation of what that amendment is and what it means and what it's doing.
we do, and we recently put out something about the 4 amendments that are going to be on the ballot coming up. So I would love if you all went to our website and downloaded that report. It's pretty easy to read, and it'll just kind of break down a little bit of that confusing language that sometimes shows up, and we think, what in the world does this mean? But that's available as well. So, well, we are so thankful that you all had us here today, and just appreciate your time. And please do connect with us. We would be honored. And thank you all. Appreciate it.
Rachel, thank you for your good presentation. Very helpful.
Great.
And as a token of our appreciation, you have a Boaz Rotary pen.
Thank you. I will treasure this. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you.